Okay, well, let's get started tonight. We're going to start with a little scripture tonight. So you can just listen. This is from Luke chapter 15. Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had two sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country. And there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would have gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.'"
You talking?
I've lost my spot now because I was here Nola talking and then I lost my spot.
No.
Nola's talking, I lost my spot. Okay. But the father said to his slaves, "Quickly bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound." Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, "Listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you, and I've never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him." Then the father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found." I thought that story would be a good place to start tonight from the standpoint of in the midst of desperation, young son, after having squandered what his inheritance was from his father, is out feeding the pigs, and he realizes that, or he thinks for a moment, he goes, "Well, I'd even eat this stuff. Who knows what these pods were? Who knows whether or not he could actually digest them?" But he was so hungry, he was ready to eat what the pigs were eating. And then he has this realization of, even the lowest in my father's house is doing better off than I am right now. And so he decides to go home and offer himself up to be that kind of lowest one in the house. But of course, the father sees it a different way. Father sees him coming, gets excited, kills the fatted calf, and throws a big celebration. And I think in the midst of Luke's gospel, there's a couple stories right in a row about this, about something being lost. When it's found, that celebration ensues. And so I think sometimes we can forget that food for so long was a form of celebration. That you only had some things when you were celebrating. I remember a counselor several years ago, and one of her favorite lines to say is, "You can't live every day like it's a 2-year-old's birthday party." And what she meant is, you can't eat cake every day. You can't, stick your face in it and figure out how to eat it with your hands and kind of whatever. That you can't live every day like it's a 2-year-old's birthday party. And so there's something. And so part of why I thought this story kind of made sense is to think about that is we've kind of lost that sense of food as celebration. That you only went certain places certain times a year because it was a celebratory thing. Well, then all of a sudden it kind of just became Well, it could be Tuesday night and you go to the Olive Garden for dinner or whatever it is, I mean, whatever you called exciting, and whatever. Oh, Farrell's ice cream parlor. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, whatever it might be that, what's kind of happened over time is, food's less of a celebration, or we've turned too many days of the week into celebration. What? Well, we have too much money. That's the problem. Yeah. Well, oh, okay. That's the reason we can do it. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yep.
Yep. Yep.
Yep. Yeah. And so we still do that. We still have certain dishes that or I would even say there's some holidays. It's like, if I don't eat this one thing, it's not going to feel like the holiday, whatever that might be, you kind of, for your tradition, your family. And that's, I think, one of the hardest things when you get married is you go to the other family's celebration and you're like, well, what's this? Why am I supposed to be excited about this dish or whatever that might be? And so that's kind of one of those negotiations you make along the way, or things you figure out along the way, or how is it that I can bring my celebration into your celebration and we can share in these things together, and kind of have both of that. But I just wanted to think about that, because I think sometimes we treat too many days like it's a 2-year-old's birthday party, and I kind of like that saying as we think about it. So, but we should find joy when something that has been lost is found. That's for sure.
Walk down the chip aisle at Walmart.
Yeah.
That's just one product.
Yeah, the chip aisle, right? Yeah.
And so as you move throughout a store like that, it's overwhelming to see the volume, choice, things that
right.
That data is, and it's hard to simplify to think it's just extract just a handful of items out of that mass.
Right.
Very challenging.
Right. Yeah. So just kind of talking about, we talk about the chip aisle, and it goes on for 60 feet, and there's every kind of variety and taste and flavor. And there's this crazy woman on Twitter who was making mac and cheese by using a whole bag of flaming hot Cheetos and like melting them down. And it was really gross. It was like, and I'm just looking at that going, I don't know what that would do to your digestion for days after that. It just didn't look appealing, but it might burn a hole in it. Yeah. Yeah. So tonight, when we're going to talk a little bit, and I'm going to use lots of stuff from this book, Why We Get Sick. Peter mentioned it last week, but this is a great book. I have a copy. If you want to borrow my copy, that's fine. But it's a good book, and it talks about some things that I don't think we talk about, and I teased it last week by saying it's also something that your doctor might not know much about in the kind of full sense of things. So a couple of big words I'm going to use today. Okay? I'm going to use big words. Okay, and I think you'll be able to understand what these words are when you break them apart. So one big word is hyperinsulinemia. It's a big word. Okay, so hyper means what? Lots of, right? Big, could be any of those kind of words, right? Insulinemia, the word's in there, lots of insulin, right? Hyperinsulin, I can't even say it. Means lots of insulin, okay? Now, most of you know kind of the opposite, right? You know about hypoglycemia, meaning you have low glucose. So, I always say after the Thanksgiving dinner, when you hit that point where you hit the wall and you feel like you could go to sleep, and everybody blames it on the tryptophan and the turkey, when actually you should probably be blaming it on the copious amount of carbs that you ate throughout the whole meal, including 10 dinner rolls and a pile of mashed potatoes and dressing and everything else. But that's hypoglycemia. Okay, that's kind of what that reaction is that your blood sugar goes high because you ate all this stuff. Your insulin kicks in, drives your blood sugar down, and all of a sudden you're comatose for a while because you're I mean, and there's of course a dangerous version of that. There's just kind of the natural cycle version of that. So I don't want to make too light of that, because if you're somebody who has hypoglycemia, it's something that happens to you quite often. That's not a pleasant thing to experience. So I don't want to make light of that. It's kind of that cycle. So here's the thing. Most doctors are only worried about glucose. So most of your doctors, you've probably all had a fasting glucose test at some point. So you go in the morning and they check your blood just to see what your fasting glucose level is. Okay. Something that you might not even know you had it. It's just in your list of stuff when you get a physical for the year and they take it. Most of you should probably know or have some idea about what your HbA1c is. So your A1C level. So that's kind of what that is kind of the picture of your average glucose over time. And it's not a precise science of what over time means. And some argue the healthier you are, the longer that time gets. So it throws the average off a little bit, but that's in the weeds. Don't worry about that. But you've probably had that test done as well at some point. And so your doctor most likely will tell you, oh, your fasting glucose was a little high or when we took it this morning, or your A1C is getting a little bit high. Okay, so those might be things you've heard. But what they don't talk about is what I think is the more important part, and this is Ben Bickman's work, and it's flowing around my head, and I'll try to do my best to take his excitement and his energy and make it even easier to understand. We'll see if I can do that. That'll be a tall order for the day. But what happens, and what you don't get from having a fasting glucose and what you don't get from having an A1C level is you don't know what your insulin's doing. And so what your body knows is out of control blood sugar is really bad. Because if your blood sugar gets too high, it does damage to your kidneys fail, and it's all over. You know, I mean, that's kind of, your body kind of understands the catastrophic kind of motions of things. So what happens as your glucose gets higher, your insulin keeps coming up to keep it in check. And so what happens sometimes is that your insulin can actually be going crazy, but your glucose still looks normal. And this is one of those things for every person, it's different. If you're kind of on the path of metabolic disease, but for every person it's different. This could be a 10-year process. This could be a 20-year process, just depending on who you are. It could be even a shorter process, probably for some people. But it's this idea that your insulin's able to keep your blood sugar looking normal, kind of as time goes on. So your doctor looks at you and says, well, everything's fine. Your glucose, your fasted glucose is fine. Your A1C is fine. And they send you on your way. But what could be happening in the background is that your insulin can keep getting higher and higher. Now, why is that a problem? Okay. So as I think we've talked about, insulin's a growth hormone. And insulin is neither good nor bad. All hormones in our body, they're neither good nor bad. They have good jobs that they do. They have negative jobs they can do if they're left on all the time. So insulin's kind of the same way. Insulin helps your body determine what you're going to use for fuel. Are you going to store fuel in the form of fat, or are you going to burn fuel, the fat that's already on your body? So insulin kind of helps make that determination. But, insulin's also important. You have to have insulin for muscle growth. You have to have insulin for growth in your body. So those are important parts of it. So there's like every hormone, like I've said, there's a good use and a not so good use, or if it's left on all the time, it's not such a good thing. So what happens as your insulin keeps raising in the background is that it means that the cells in your body starts with your muscles, then moves into other places in your body, but they become insulin resistant, meaning that the insulin no longer affects those cells the same way as they would have in the past. So normally you eat a meal. If your body's doing well, you eat a meal and 80% of the glucose that you take in goes into your muscles, kind of just sits in your muscles, and it's there as glycogen so that if a bear comes out of nowhere, you've got quick energy that hits your muscles and you start moving. I'm not quite sure what it's for in our world today, but you know what I mean. So it's meant to be quick energy. It's there and it's kind of ready to go. So what happens is if your muscles become insulin resistant, then that insulin has to go somewhere. And that's usually when it starts growing fat in other places or doing some of those other kinds of things. And that's when we can start getting into trouble. But like I said, so what happens so often is doctors get caught up on your glucose so much that they don't even measure for insulin. If you would ask most of your average doctors, could I get a fasting insulin level? They'd either say no, or they would look at you like, well, what do you think that's going to tell you? There's not, because that's not something they measure. Now, I'm not telling you shouldn't ask. And actually, I think I saw here recently, Quest will do them and they're not really that expensive. So if that's interests you, it's something you can have done. So what a fasting insulin can do is to tell you how insulin resistant in a sense you are, like what's going on in the background. Because by the time you get to be diabetic, and then of course your A1C is higher, your fasting or your fasting glucose is higher. By that point, you've already kind of put yourself down this road of having too much insulin present for too long. And even what can happen at that point is your pancreas can kind of start getting tired. Doesn't never stop, but it just gets tired and can't produce enough insulin to kind of force the blood sugar back down again. Does this make sense kind of as I'm explaining? I'm trying to explain it simply, but it's also not simple. Yeah, there's a question, I think. Is there a question? No. Yeah.
I know it seems like my doctor is always more interested in the A1C.
Yeah. So Sue was saying that her doctor's more interested in her A1C than her fasting glucose. And so that's true it can be true on some level, and every doctor's got their own kind of thing. Like I said, because A1C is a snapshot over time. They say 3 months, but it can be different for each. I mean, this is where we're all different. So everybody's kind of timeline can be different. They don't know what it is. They just say it's kind of whatever, 3 months, whatever it might be. So that's the thing they're curious about. But like I said, then the problem is you don't know what's going on with the insulin on the other side of things. Where I think this goes really awry in kind of the way medicine happens in America is that if you hit that point where you're diabetic and your pancreas isn't making enough insulin, you could be a type 2 diabetic, and then all of a sudden the doctor will say, well, let's just give you more insulin because there's not enough insulin to bring your blood sugar down. We want your blood sugar down, so let's give you more insulin. Not thinking about then, what does that do? So if you give a type 2 diabetic, I even wrote this down because he shares that information. If you give a type 2 diabetic, you push insulin, it triples their risk of heart disease, it doubles their risk of cancer, and they'll automatically gain 10 to 30 pounds.
Oof.
I mean, that's just kind of, and in the end, you didn't fix the problem. You just kept trying to treat something that's kind of a sign that there's a problem, but not the actual problem. Okay. Does that make some sense? Am I making sense? Can I ask that question? And Peter, did I get any of that wrong? That you would change what I said? Okay. I just want to make sure I'm saying it right. I think I tried to re-listen to it and get it in my head, but so then there's other things that can cause you to become insulin resistant. I think the interesting thing, there are 2 times in your life, well, and actually In a man's life, there's only one time. In a woman's life, there's 2 times in their life that they become insulin resistant on purpose. That, physiologically, like it has to happen that way. Puberty is one of those times, and the other time is pregnancy, because there's so much growth that has to happen that the body kind of becomes insulin resistant to raise that insulin level to create growth. So those are kind of the 2 times in life that it happens naturally. Other things that can cause insulin resistance, if you have lots of inflammation in your body, that can cause you to become insulin resistant, which is kind of interesting. You can also, if you don't get enough sleep. So if you have elevated cortisol, if you're just kind of anxious a lot, or you have lots of stress happening in your life, your cortisol is high all the time, that can cause you to be insulin resistant as well. So it's good to get good sleep. There's also some interesting thing about if you eat too much, and this is where it goes back to seed oils once again, that if you eat too much linoleic acid, which is in all your seed oils, they make your fat cells insulin resistant. And that's not a good thing either. So, because what happens when your fat cells become insulin resistant is then your body starts shoving fat in places it shouldn't. And that's when you get visceral fat. Visceral fat's the fat that's around your organs, and your doctor will say that's bad fat. That's not good fat to have. Adipose fat is the stuff on the outside kind of thing. So when you're too much linoleic acid can make your fat cells insulin resistant, which causes even more damage because you're then kind of creating fat in other places along the way. Okay. So what do you do? What do you do, right? I think the most important thing to think about in this whole process is that some of us, and I was this way for a long time, and I try not to be this way now. But a lot of us, the way we eat causes an unintentional roller coaster. And that means if you eat lots of carbs, lots of sugar, maybe something that's got lots of seed oils in it, whatever it might be, your blood sugar raises high, and then your insulin kicks in to cover that. And then your blood sugar bottoms out, which then makes you hungry because your body says, oh, hey, there's not enough energy here, which then gives you the want to eat more carbs to not be hungry, which then if you eat those carbs, it raises your blood sugar, and you just kind of keep this cycle going. Yeah. So one of the things, one of the ways you combat that is to try to eat things that don't make your blood sugar go crazy. And I wish this is one of those things, I wish I could simply say it's always these things. But this is another time where every person is different. Now, there are some things specifically, if you eat sugar, you eat half a pan of fudge, it's going to make your blood sugar go really high, and you're going to get some insulin coming in to cover that kind of thing. So there are certain things like that are very true. Now, I've heard all kinds of crazy things about, different people that, there's some people that coffee will actually make their blood sugar go up. Now, not many people, but there are people out there that happens to. There are other, so once again, we are all individuals. And so what works for one person or what affects one person is very different than how it might affect somebody else. Here, right before Christmas, I think it was, I wore a continuous glucose monitor for 2 weeks. And I don't know if did I tell you guys about this? Did I tell you guys? Oh, I did tell you about this. Okay. Oh, well, some of you remember me telling you and some of you don't remember. So that's fine. I'll say it again. So I wore a continuous glucose monitor for 2 weeks. And Some people I know on Twitter, when they get one, they go crazy. And they're like, first thing they do is go eat donuts just to see what happens, or they go eat this or that. Or I just know that makes me feel bad. So I'm like, I'm going to basically eat what I would normally eat over that 2-week period that I was wearing the glucose monitor. And for me, when it came to food, I never wavered probably more than 20 points. From the lowest glucose to the highest glucose. I was in the 80s most of the time, sat there pretty comfortably. And I think this is where I do remember saying this, is that the only time I got it really high was during exercise. I do sprints in the morning, and when I would do sprints, I could get my blood glucose up to 140. And that's just because your body's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. You have glycogen in your muscles, you start running, it releases that into your system, your blood sugar goes up. It's actually a very good measure that the body's doing what it's supposed to do. But that, for me, that was the highest thing. I did test with a couple of kind of snack kind of things I like once in a while that, are a little iffy. And there's at least one of them that my blood sugar went a little bit higher than anything else. But it wasn't anything that was that remarkable. And really, for me, that's what I wanted to know. I guess I wanted to know that I had my body in a pretty healthy place. The more I've been hearing about continuous glucose monitors, and depending on your doctor, and like I said, we went to a functional medicine doctor, and he's the one that wrote the prescription, but my insurance company actually paid for it. Which we were surprised by, considering we're neither, I shouldn't say this on YouTube probably, but it was Sarah's prescription. We got a month worth, and she wore one for 2 weeks, and I wore one for 2 weeks. But you're not supposed to do that. That's illegal, I guess. But I shouldn't, as a pastor, promote things that aren't legal. But of things that are illegal, well, no, I'm not even going to get into that. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to justify my sin. Yeah, that's right. Not gonna go there. But that's one of those things that I actually think if more people could wear one and just live your life the way you normally live it in a 2-week period, you'd learn a lot about the things that you eat, and learn a lot about the things that do cause your blood sugar to spike, do things that you are reacting to in a way that you don't know you are. And really it's too bad because, if you think about the cost of diabetes, so if at some point you have full-blown diabetes, the cost of that, it's like, even out of pocket, it's like $80 for 2 weeks or $80 for the month for a continuous glucose monitor. Like, that's a pretty inexpensive investment to, if it actually changes kind of the course of where you're going in your own health. But once again, that's one of those things that most doctors will say, well, what would you want one of those for? That's for people who are diabetic. But like I said, I think you can learn a lot about kind of your own physiology by doing something like that. So if the goal is to keep your insulin down, then of course the goal is to limit things that make your insulin go up. And you can, insulin resistance is one of those things that you can get to go away. I don't know what channel it is, but some channel I watch, there's some new drug out that they tout as getting rid of insulin resistance, because there's always a new drug. There's always a new drug that'll be the next thing that you need to have. But what they don't simply tell you is if you change the way you're eating, you can do that without medication pretty easy. Yes, Nola?
Yeah, when you say keep your insulin down, what is a normal reading?
Oh God, now you're gonna ask me fasting insulin, what that level is. Is it 5? Lower, 4? 3? Yeah, waiting for Peter to chime in back here, because that's the number off the top of my head. I was afraid you were going to ask me. It's one of those things, like I said, if you had a test done, they would give you some idea of where your fasting insulin is. I just know one of the podcasts I listened to, one of the doctors, he had somebody in his office that their fasting glucose was fine, their A1C was fine, and their insulin was 40. So if your insulin's supposed to be at 3 or somewhere in there, his was at 40. But at that point, his body was compensating for all the carbohydrate he was eating. But that's, well, like I said, that's not good for your body to be pumping out that much insulin all the time.
What makes it?
Your pancreas does. Yeah.
Do you have pancreatic cancer?
Right. Well, yeah. So if something happens to your pancreas, you know, I had a friend growing up. Well, he was my parents' friend, but he basically, they took out most of his insides because he had cancer. They took out tons of his intestine. They took out his pancreas. They took out, you know, so all of a sudden he went from being one day kind of a normal person to being a type 1 diabetic the next day because they took out his pancreas. There's no way for his body to make insulin. For most people who are type 1 diabetics, there's often they say it's an autoimmune issue that causes their pancreas to stop working. So that's why they have to have insulin. That's why they have to inject insulin or take some kind of a slow acting insulin. Yes, because if you don't have insulin in your body, you don't live. You got to have insulin. That's the big part of that. So that's why I say all of these things, they have their good points and they have their negative points. It's just, you got to have it around, but you don't want it around and high all the time. That's the big part of that. So, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, since you said pancreatic cancer. So another reason for keeping your insulin down or giving your body a rest once in a while from making so much insulin or having so much insulin around is that because insulin makes things grow, there's at least some who would say that that's why your cancer risk goes up, is because if you start to have those kind of cells growing that they're not supposed to be, and you've got all this insulin around, well, it's got some source for that cancer to take off. There's also some thought that a lot of cancers thrive on glucose. So obviously, if you're eating stuff that's high in sugar, that then is causing your insulin to be high, you're kind of giving it the perfect storm of ingredients to grow. So that's kind of one piece of that. And there's actually, and I wasn't necessarily thinking about talking about this, but one of the things that if you get into just kind of, I'll throw out the term intermittent fasting, meaning like for me, most of the time I fast at least 16 hours from my last meal in an evening till the first meal the next day. Sometimes it's 18, sometimes it's 20, depends on the day, depends on what's going on. But if you actually deplete the glycogen stores, you get into what they call ketosis. Your body starts making ketones. But there's also another process that's somewhere in there, and this is one of those things we don't know how to measure, so we don't know exactly when it happens. It probably happens different for every person. But there's this process called autophagy that happens, and there's another big word for you, autophagy. But what autophagy is autophagy is kind of like your self-cleaning system. When you fire off autophagy in your body's looking for junk protein. So we're constantly converting long chain proteins into shorter chain proteins. And at some point you just kind of have these junk pieces of protein in your body. And so what autophagy is doing is cleaning that stuff up. So it's kind of like sending the Roomba around your body when you hit autophagy. That kind of cleans things up in that way. And so there's some thought process that when you leave all this junk protein sitting around, that's part of how you raise your risk for cancer, is because you're just kind of leaving all the junk around and you're not cleaning the junk up. And so at some point that junk can start to turn into something that you don't want it to turn into. And that's probably way too simple, like simplified. But I think you get the basics of that piece. But it's one of those things where you can't say, well, Pastor, how long does that mean I can't eat? Well, it depends on what you ate the day before. You know, I mean, that's part of it. If you didn't eat much if you didn't eat a lot of carbohydrates the day before, it's not going to take you that long to burn through the carbohydrates that are stored, the glycogen that's stored. So then your liver will start producing that, and you'll start producing ketones. And autophagy will amazingly happen at some point. And there's just arguments over when. We just know that it happens. And so I think that's, like I said, that's every person's different in that way.
Can you spell that word?
Autophagy?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's auto, A-U-T-O,
Uh-huh.
and that's P-H-A-G-Y, if I'm correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Peter's shaking his head. I'll take that as a win.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, the definition that I've heard of autophagy is actually that it's eat thyself, is actually what it means. You know, is that because that's really what you're doing, is you're cleaning up the junk protein in your body. So stuff that can't be used for another purpose. And so if you think about that, so it's a good thing to let your body hit that resting point where it's cleaning up the stuff that doesn't belong there. But then, as you can imagine, as most people in America eating kind of the standard American diet, we never give our bodies a break. You know, you eat dinner or you eat ice cream at 10 o'clock and you go to bed, and then you get up at 6:30, 7 o'clock and you eat a bowl of cereal, and your body never got a break. You know, you never had a chance to kind of clear any of that out. So that's a big piece of that as well. Questions about that part or things to add to that?
So ketosis is a good thing in the progression.
Yeah, so here's the question about ketosis. Yeah, so ketosis is a good thing. It is when your body changes from burning glucose for fuel to burning fat for fuel. Do you have to supplement or anything? No, you don't have to supplement at all. The funny thing about it is for most people, you have to teach your body how to burn fat. It's kind of one of those things where it's not, for some people, when you start, your body doesn't know how to do it because it hasn't had to do it for a long time. So for most of the time, when you're trying to start out getting into ketosis, that's when they talk about you add butter to most things that you want to add butter to, you know, and some people add butter to their coffee even. That's not something I do, but some people do that. And really, in a sense, all you're trying to do is get your body to figure out how to burn fat, and it knows how to do it. It's just, like I said, depending on how you've been living, it could have been years since it's had to do it, kind of thing. It's gone to sleep and has to kind of regain that process. But yeah, so then once your body gets into ketosis, then intermittent fasting gets easy. And I always kind of, when I'm kind of coaching somebody as they're getting started, as I say, when you start forgetting about breakfast and all of a sudden it's like lunch or a little after lunch and you're finally getting hungry, that's a pretty good sign that you're burning fat at that point, because that's just it's just what happens is your body just doesn't need to kind of eat as often or as frequently. And so it's often a good sign that you're burning fat at that point. You know, and I can say, you know, when I started, I would take some MCT oil, and I did different things, and until you kind of figure out you don't need to do all that stuff. And now I would tell somebody, don't even bother starting there. Like if you like your coffee black in the morning, just keep drinking black coffee in the morning. Don't worry about adding fat to it. You know, at the same time, if you're having some You know, if you like broccoli or something, pour some butter on it, and that's okay, because it's going to help you. It's going to help your body figure that process out. But at some point, you want your body to burn its fat, not burn the fat you're putting in your body as a fuel. So, and this is one of those things that's tricky as well, because it's not by any means settled. There are some people who have been in ketosis, losing weight, or have lost a lot of weight, have been doing this for years, and they eat an insane amount of fat. And for their body, that works. And there's other people who have dialed it that they eat an insane amount of protein, and they don't eat hardly any fat, and they've, you know, kind of done something, and that for their body works. And so that's the kind of piece, you know, but that's kind of the down the road piece of it. If you've got extra weight on your body at this moment, you know, then you don't have to worry about that necessarily. The macros aren't quite as important. Just get the carbs low enough that's really the only thing you have to count. You know, when I started the process, you know, I was at 340 pounds probably. And the only thing I counted was carbs. And I kind of did net carbs when I started. And then I switched to total carbs fairly quick. But, you know, I mean, at that point, because I weighed as much as I did, I would lose 5, 6, 7 pounds a week easily. But that's also because of how much weight I had to lose. And as time goes on, you know, that process will slow down, or you'll stall once in a while. And I always say when you stall in the midst of weight loss, it just means your body's working on something else. There's some other process your body's trying to fix or trying to get a handle of that you don't need to worry about as much. And so, I mean, I know when we started this, there was a couple of people who were kind of just asking even about maintenance, and for me, maintenance is experiment time. You know, I take a month and a half, 2 months, and I'll try something, and I'll see what's the result of trying something. Like I said, I've been eating more protein just to see what happens. And you know, that's fine. When you're at maintenance, that's fine. Figure it out for yourself. Be curious.
How are you seeing what's happening? What are you looking for? Just how you feel?
I'm looking for how I feel. I'm looking for, does it, you know, I don't like the scale. The scale's a liar for the most part, because there's so much evidence and there's so many people that this is true for, that, you know, they won't lose a pound on the scale, but all of a sudden they've lost 6 inches around their waist. And so if you're going to start this process, I would say get the tape measure out. The tape measure becomes more important than a bathroom scale. And you know,
at 340 though, the scale's pretty nice on the way down.
The scale's nice on the way down at 340. Yes, I would agree with that totally. But you know, the thing that I would say is I don't have all those first measurements, and I really wish I did, because then it just kind of gives you that sense of, oh, this is what I really changed. I mean, you know, you changed because you're wearing different clothes and you're wearing different pants, you know, kind of all those things, but you're like, you don't really kind of know the full extent of that. And for me, yes, you could watch it happen on the scale. And I think most of you could watch it happen from week to week, coming to church almost sometimes as it was happening. But it's important, especially when you hit a stall, that if you've been taking good measurements along the way, then you can see, oh, my body's still making adjustments in the midst of this, even though the scale's staying put. So I think that's an important piece as well. One of the very basic things, and the sign of metabolic health, is you should measure your waist around your belly button, and that measurement should be less than half of your height. That's kind of the simplest measurement tool. So your waist at your belly button should be less than half of your height.
Yeah, I think at this point, getting taller is out.
At this point, getting taller is out. Yes. If you've passed the insulin resistant stage of puberty, then yes, you're.
Then you start going the other way.
Getting taller. Yeah. Then you start shrinking the other way. Yeah. 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 One of the things that I would say about it, and one of the things that just made sense to me as I got started in this process, and I've said this before, but I'll just kind of repeat it now, is, when Evelyn was born, I jumped on Weight Watchers because I felt old and overweight, and I probably wasn't. I was like at 310, 315, somewhere in that range, and I lost. I don't even remember how much I lost. I got down to maybe 240, somewhere in there, which for me, I thought was great. But I told you this, and the thing that got me to stop was if I went down to 239, then I had to eat less because I had to drop my points in Weight Watchers. It went by how much you weighed. So if you weighed less, you had to start eating less. And at some point you just look at it and go, I don't want to eat less. Like, I'm hungry now. I can't will myself into eating less. And so, I did that diet. There was another point, Sarah was turning 35. So I don't know how old I was at that point, a few years older than that. But, like I said, we went to this guy and he measured your body and said, and I remember mine was like 1,704 calories, eat 1,704 calories a day. And only go within like 4 calories below or above every day. So you like end the day eating M&Ms to get the measurement right. I mean, seriously. I mean, it was ridiculous. But once again, I lost a bunch of weight, and it works for a while because you can willpower yourself through it for a while, and you lose weight, you think you're feeling better and kind of whatever, and then all of a sudden you hit this point where you're like, I'm just tired and I'm hungry and I just want to eat something. And the thing, yeah, Peter.
It's really important for people to understand how driving hunger is. And so much of traditional, conventional wisdom is expecting people to live with hunger. And it's a non-starter. If you read about the best starvation study that was done, Ansel Keys did it back in World War II. There was concern about feeding people who had been starving in Europe. They got, I forget how many conscientious objectors to volunteer for this study run out of University of Minnesota. At least a dozen, they controlled them basically and only gave them so much to eat. And they observed all that happened, which included things that they called starvation psychosis. These people became obsessed with food. Some of them actually had emotional breakdowns that required institutionalization. One person first tried to cut off a finger and then succeeded in cutting off 3 to get out of this. And they had volunteered for this. And what's most amazing is the calorie level of this study was higher than what's recommended for slimming diets today. And they used to call such diets semi-starvation diets because that's what you were doing. But they understood that you could only do that for so long. And then these people that had undergone this experienced something that they called post-starvation obesity. So people who have undergone this phenomenon of starvation, something happens and they regain that weight, but they don't regain it typically as lean muscle mass. They regain it as fat, which is absolutely not what we want to do. So it's important to have all that as background and understand that what Pastor's talking about is a demonstrated way to lose weight without hunger. And oh, by the way, improve all these metabolic markers at the same time. And in fact, we now have studies that show significant metabolic improvement without weight loss, because the gainsayers have been saying, well, it's only because they lost weight that they had these improvements. And so people had to figure out how to do a study that kept their weight pretty constant, and yet they had the metabolic improvement. So this is really good news, really powerful. And I just wanted to put that out there, because I don't think, unless you've lived with that kind of constant thinking about what I can eat, what I shouldn't eat, what's the weight doing, I'm hungry, but I just ate, all that kind of, had a hollow leg all your life, all those things. This is not that. This is absolutely different.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, and to kind of the modern day version of that study, that Minnesota study, was called a show called The Biggest Loser. And there's a reason why they never have a reunion show of The Biggest Loser, because they've all gained it back or more, because you wreck your metabolism. I mean, because it is starvation, and you completely wreck your metabolism, and you just set yourself up for failure. So that's where I was leading. And thank you, Peter, for interjecting at that point too. So the way I eat now is that I don't feel hungry. Hardly. I mean, like I said, it's 17, 18, sometimes 20 hours since my last meal that I'm then finally feeling hungry. There was a podcast that used to be on a couple years ago. They were called the Two Keto Dudes, but one of the lines they would say is at the beginning of the show, they would say, you eat the fat on your steak, or that Krispy Kreme donut that you ate 10 years ago, or something like that. That's on your body. It's that you put away for later use. That's what you're living on these days, kind of thing. So there's some interesting things. So when I started, simply, like I said, I was trying to keep my carbs low. And I don't know that I always made it to 20 grams or stayed under 20 grams to start with. If you look at, for most people, if you look at what you're eating today, and you look at 20 grams of carbs, it's going to be kind of shocking at first. And the nice thing is, though, you don't have to measure calories. You don't have to count calories. You don't have to weigh anything. You just kind of pay attention to it, and it kind of comes fairly naturally. At least it did for me. And I didn't have to do anything crazy that way.
One of the challenges, I think, if you don't organize or strategize about it, then you're making random choices, unfortunately,
right.
Compromise instead of having a plan.
Right.
And take the guessing out of it, or the talking yourself into something else.
Right. You have to have a great plan. And that's the part I would say for sure. One of the things that I have cooked myself dinner every night since I started this, basically, other than a couple of times where we've been on vacation and had, dinner out somewhere, or you raided the deli at some grocery store and bought, chicken, the breast that was baked, or, whatever you could kind of make up to make a meal kind of thing. I've cooked my own meals kind of during this time, because in a lot of ways, that's how you plan. Because if you're leaving it up to somebody else to make the right decision for you, then it gets really hard. It's hard to go to a restaurant and ask questions about how your food's prepared. It's hard to say, oh, are you adding this, or are you really using butter? Is this margarine? Is this, you have to ask that kind of some of these questions if you're really interested in knowing what's going on. In most cases, most places, if they're frying anything, they're frying it in some seed oil. There are a few places out there that might be frying in some other stuff. Some places they might be able to if you ask them, but they probably can't because of just the volume they're doing. So for me, it became much easier just to eat at home, because then you can kind of control those variables a lot easier. And I'm not saying you have to do that, because I'm just saying for me, that became the easy way to kind of figure it out. Yeah.
When you started the carb counting, basically what you're doing,
Yeah.
what level did you start at?
Well, when I started carb counting, I mean, I think I was aiming at 20 when I started, but I kind of started there. I mean, I kind of started there, but I was also, like I said, I was netting it more than I was total carbing it. So you to net carb, you can subtract fiber, you can subtract sugar, alcohols. There's kind of a formula you can do. So what it got me allowed to do is that there's Costco makes these protein bars that I could figure out that I could eat one of those a day and still kind of keep myself where I thought was probably okay. And really, when early on I was losing weight, so it didn't matter. You know, in that sense, it didn't matter. It just as time went on, I kind of realized, yeah, these things aren't helping me at all. You know, they're just a replacement I'm using for something else.
You just actually started right at the level that you were shooting for.
I can be one of those people that if I make up my mind to do something, if I can be convinced why I should do something, I will do it, and I will stick to it as long as I can, as long as it's working. I mean, like the guy who did the measurements on my body, I mean, we sat through a whole day's worth of presentation on his explanation of why this was the right thing. And I left there that day believing the science of what he told me, and enough to say that I'm going to do this. I'm going to go home and I'm going to do this. And I did it, you know, for a number of time until I couldn't do it anymore. Now the difference, like I said, with this is I haven't had that moment of saying I can't do this anymore. Yeah, Nola.
When you have all this excess fat and you lose, what happens to all that excess skin?
Well, you do end up with some excess skin, and that's just a reality. You know, I've seen people who are 100 pounds overweight that were in their 20s and they lose all the weight, and it doesn't even, you don't even know, because like they still were young and elastic and whatever else. Yeah. One of the things that a lot of people talk about is why fasting is good, especially as you're losing weight, is that autophagy process can help some. It won't help completely, but it helps some. I mean, in some ways, I don't have a lot of excess skin like some people do, considering the amount of weight I lost.
Yeah, that's primarily an aesthetic concern.
Well, it is an aesthetic concern. Yeah. And it can be uncomfortable. I mean, you hear some stories of people, you lose a lot of weight and then you get chafing issues and some other stuff just because, like you might have had before you lost the weight, but then you have them again. Yeah. So, you know, so there's some, you know, that could be a negative piece to it as well. I mean, I think one of the hopes of this, and I think this goes back to Peter's question from the first night, is, you know, what if the church became a place where we focused on metabolic health, that no one was metabolically unhealthy. And I don't know if that's exactly the way you said it, Peter, but something to that extent. But if you thought about that, if you think about that, you know, one of the things I'm trying to do right now is trying to tell my kids, I wish I knew some things 10, 15, 20 years ago that I know today, because we haven't set you up for success based on how we've been feeding you for all these years. We fed you the way we thought we were supposed to, and we didn't do you any favors. You know, so I have two kids that have been doing keto kind of eating for the most part. You know, they have times where they go off and, you know, spend a few days with friends or whatever and eat whatever they want. But at the same time, but what I'm trying to do is trying to do it in such a kind of natural, healthy way, is just to say, here's kind of this is a natural way to eat. Now, it doesn't mean you can't do this once in a while. It just means you got to live here most of the time, kind of thing. So it's not obsessive and it's not crazy. But it's also, I'm teaching them how to cook. You know, it's like one of those things where up to this point, you know, it's like, yeah, I could just put some together and everybody eats it and that's fine. But it's like, this is getting them to cook, because they're at the point where they want recipes. I'm at the point where I don't want recipes anymore. I just cook up some meat and eat it. That's where I'm at, kind of thing. Or my life's pretty simple at this point. So, but what it's allowed me to do is teach them how to cook, so they can take that over for themselves. Yeah.
You know, my daughter is son-in-law, and this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the middle grandson was having trouble focusing.
Uh-huh.
He could be,
Yeah.
but focusing on schoolwork.
Yeah.
And on the keto plan, or trying to eat that way more,
Yeah.
it sharpened his
Yeah.
concentration.
Yeah, so Sue is saying one of the middle grandchild in one of the families where the whole family's eating keto, he had some focus issues. And the more closer to keto they were eating as a family, the better his focus became. And I think I told you this story as well. I have a cousin who's 1 year younger than me to the day. And he early on was diagnosed with ADHD or whatever they called it at the time. And what did his mom know? His mom knew if she didn't feed him cereal for breakfast and she didn't do some of these things, that he had better focus throughout the day. So she knew that without medication, if you eliminate a lot of the sugar out of his diet, he had better focus. And that's really, in a sense, what your grandson was learning too, is that you take away the sugar. And that's, I guess, one of my concerns too, is we medicate a lot of kids for ADD and ADHD and those kind of things, when if we changed what they were eating, we would probably have a better effect on what's happening to them and for them in school. And, sometimes that's the school lunches. School lunches are pretty carb heavy, and they're not necessarily setting kids up to start the day well when you get a bagel with, jelly and and a glass of orange juice, and then you're going to go to class. There's better choices that could be made or could be kind of helped along the way. So
You would think they'd be wanting to teach us just that now and at a younger age, because it would be a whole lot easier to control their diabetes, all the other stuff.
yeah,
Weight.
yeah. Well, and
They just keep shoving that stuff out.
well, yeah, and I think so. So if we can kind of end on this for tonight, but one of the things, and I've said this a couple times, and I'll say it again, is that anytime the system makes money if people eat highly refined foods and are sick. Why are there 40 different drugs to do the same thing or the same kind of range of things? Because they make money if they sell those 40 drugs. The same way, if you eat from the middle of the grocery store, they make more money than if you eat from the outside aisles of the grocery store. And so a lot of the food guidelines, a lot of what kids are fed in schools, all that kind of stuff, are shaped not by science, but are shaped by policies that help industry more than they help people. Yeah, Hannah.
Yeah, I did some reading labels with the special sugar label,
Uh-huh.
and I went and checked granola out. It went from 6 or 8 different kinds of granola. And the cheapest one had the biggest amount of sugar.
Yep.
The most expensive at the least tells me sugar.
Yeah. So Hannah just said she was at Winco and she was looking at all the kinds of granola. And she said the cheapest granola had the most amount of sugar in it, and the most expensive had the least amount of sugar, because sugar's cheap.
Sure.
And so that's a big piece of that as well. And so that's why, that's why in some ways I think we need to figure out a way to talk about this in general. And I also, we need to talk about it in a way that it's not about fat versus skinny, or it's not about any of these things. It's really about our overall health as a society, and happiness that goes along with that. and the energy that you get from feeling good, and the not need to go to the doctor all the time because of this or that or the next thing, because you're taking care of your body. That's really, I think, where the focus needs to be.
Yeah, if the parent isn't training from day one, what are you training?
Right.
And so you just set that in motion.
Right.
In whatever direction that goes. And
right.
You know, that knowledge to me is the only thing that can eventually change that. I think in a free society, we just need to deny buying the products and they will go away. But as long as we choose them, they'll continue to come. And,
yeah.
I want to think that people have more control than outside sources. Otherwise, we'll never get there. We'll just keep waiting for somebody else to manage my world.
Right.
Because I can't accept full responsibility.
Right.
For it.
Right.
And some things could be curbed clearly, but I think in the end, it's still going to be the consumer who has to put that down.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the consumer has a lot of power with the choices that you make about what you buy and what you don't buy. And that's, I think, why they keep making crazy new flavors of Oreos, because you're tired. You stop buying the regular ones, so they got to make Swedish fish flavored ones to try to get you to eat those, or whatever crazy things they're making now. You know.
Shapes of Reese's do they have? They have
yeah, how many shapes of Reese's? Exactly. You know. Although the Christmas trees taste better than the regular ones, but you know, that's from experience. I haven't had one recently, but that's from experience. Yeah. Yeah, no, so no, you're absolutely, I mean, you're right, but it is what we teach our children. There's kind of another piece to that as well, and we're not going to get into that tonight because it's already getting late, but you know, there's even a sense of how we set children up in the womb with how the mother's health is, that affects how children are born, that I don't think we talk about kind of that whole process through either. So I think just raising awareness as much as we can, having the conversations with our kids as we can. The thing that I'm still trying to figure out is how am I going to get WIC to give a baby formula that's not full of junk. And I'm not there yet, but I'm going to keep thinking about it, or I'm going to keep figuring it out, because that's all you're doing is setting them up for the want.
It was interesting because I have this foster boy and I was given a WIC card. And I never used one before, but when you go shopping at Walmart, it really forces you into specific brands. But the good news is it's the 1% milk or skim milk or something, or it was a lot of healthy choices. They simply would not let you get out and buy something. That included certain juices too. Now, their juices weren't the best choice, but they were trying to be realistic, I think, with most families. Also, but it was interesting. It was better than I had thought. Right.
Well, but I think what you're saying is kind of what WIC allows you to buy. And one of the interesting things about that is that 1% milk and skim milk isn't the best choice. You know, one, probably kids shouldn't drink as much milk as they do. But if they are going to drink some, actually drinking whole milk is probably a little bit healthier, because there's not as much sugar. They have to actually add sugar to skim milk to make it taste like something. So,
and this may be true. I felt their intent.
Yeah, the intent was maybe, yeah.
The goods.
Yeah.
Clearly was you couldn't buy Cheetos, you know, you could
Right.
buy just a lot of junk.
Right, right. The idea was to try to get you to buy some stuff that was a little bit healthier. Yeah.
You had to. It included even vegetables as part of your, and then the allotment in what you spent were categories.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
had to go buy vegetables.
Had to buy vegetables and had to buy, yeah. No, I mean, I think there is some sense of trying. I just think there's also then some sense that we have to have science behind what we're doing, and we don't necessarily have science behind the choices that we're making, or the choices that we're making for others even. So that's the other piece of it. So, okay, let's end with a word of prayer, and then we'll meet one more time, I think, next week, and we'll kind of wrap things up. Come with your questions, think of things to ask. And we'll wrap up next week because Lent starts and I'll be busy on Wednesday nights. So we'll try not to have busy Tuesday nights as well. It's Lent. Yeah. Starting next week. So let's pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for this day, and we give you thanks for the opportunity to gather together and to learn, to discuss, to open our minds to so many different things. we want to, I think we want to live in a way that you would have us live so that we can thrive in this world, that we can live healthy in this world and serve you in the things that we do. But we don't always know the right choices along the way. And so we need some guidance and some help. And we ask for your patience with us as we do this. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Who was here?